All right, so we have swivel chair operations, and I think probably the best place to start is kind of defining what swivel chair operations means. So, Alex, I'll put you on the spot first.
Absolutely. So Rob and we've been talking for a while about some of the pain points in the logistics industry. And amongst the top of them is the continued challenge of swivel chair operations. Logistics is up year over year. It's a $1 trillion industry here in North America alone, ending 2019. Even though it took a hit in the second quarter of this year, it is back up and back up in a very strong way, as we saw in some of the earnings release last week. And one of the challenges is with increased volumes and increased traffic in this vertical is more manual efforts. And with more manual efforts and more volume, if you don't have automation, you have to literally use that swivel chair at your desk to access and update a variety of different systems, whether they're transport management systems and TMSs, or if they're traditional ERPs, CRMs, whatever they might be. These are all requiring a lot of manual access for both companies, large and small. And there's fatigue for these companies and their customers and clients, as well as employees, because expectations on timeframes of how quickly something can happen is often mismet or underdelivered. And certainly from an employee perspective, there's a lot of fatigue from doing the same routine again and again in a very rote fashion without any line of sight to automation. And that's when we talk about swivel chair operations, that's what we're really, what we're talking about. Right, Rob?
Yeah, totally agree. I think the one thing I would add is that, you have scenarios, particularly multimodal scenarios where customers or partners are having to piece together, trip plans from systems that you may not even own, right? So not only the things that Alex described, but the same systems from different vendors, different suppliers, 3PLs, whatever the case may be. And yeah, what a mess to try to manage, lots of loads, lots of shipments in that type of an environment. So
it's really, without automation, it is impossible to do a good job. And I stress good job because it can be done. There's going to be a lot of fingers on a lot of different keyboards to make that happen. And with those fingers on keyboards, you ultimately end up with a challenge across the board, which is data integrity, right? That manual input that we see from one system to the next, and a lot of the workarounds to copy and paste information from one system over to the next. We see a lot of fallout in this industry, don't we?
Oh yeah. And you're missing the real challenge is you're missing the expectations of the customer, right? You're just not hitting the mark because either one, you have to follow up misinformation with phone calls and emails, or two, you're providing some sort of a technological solution that's just flat out wrong and just has the wrong information in it. And wow, what a terrible customer experience that could turn into. And that can hurt revenue. You lose customers, your net promoter scores go down. It's not a good place to be.
No, that's a huge challenge. So what do we do, Rob, from a solution perspective? We see this complexity and intricacy across the variety of systems that we're having to use to operate these logistics companies. What do we do? What are the different areas that we should be focused on?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? I think in the world of international shipping and international supply chains, there's just an inherent complexity that's in most businesses now that just hasn't been there, in the past. So the engineering has to meet that level of complexity with its own mature solutions. And what I think for me, what it means is, the companies, all of the individual companies that are involved in your particular supply chain has to be able to communicate. And so there's this underlying foundation of a platform of some sort that can manage communication across companies in the supply chain. Now, in the past, I think we all know about EDI transmissions, and that's been kind of the rock that's been there for decades.
And help me with EDI again, would you?
Yeah. So electronic data interchange, and it's basically a format and a platform that was set up again decades ago, early 70s, if I believe, if that's right. And it was a way for companies to send requests for loads, to get confirmation that they received those requests, to give updates on position of where your loads are, and then ultimately to send billing information and receipt of payments. So the entire life cycle had this electronic component that was set up. The challenge, though, is that things have become so complex, and there's so many parties now that can be involved in your supply chain, that the EDI concept has kind of run its course. And now you run into scenarios where the timeliness just isn't there. And so if you have a trucker that needs to go pick up a load at a customs depot at a port, and he's sitting in line because there's 50 other truckers trying to get to everything that came on that container ship. If you don't know that trucker's sitting there, or he just gives up and he doesn't go and he doesn't pick up the load.
Right.
How do you get that information? What do you do? So there's a whole new level of maturity in systems that's required to support those use cases.
Sure. And so with those scalability and complexity challenges, we view through one of the lens from a solution perspective. We talk a lot about operational excellence and operational optimization. Using the example that you had of a truck driver picking up a load at a harbor and losing visibility to the timetable beyond that, and understanding when that particular delivery is coming in and how long it's going to take to get onto the back of the truck and then get out of there. That's, I think, a great example that probably all of us can at least understand at the most fundamental level. And if we're trying to think about that and follow that, one of the challenges is those EDIs are not the same depending on the mode of transit. And when I say mode of transit, from an intermodal perspective, I'm talking about the fact that some are going to use ship and freight, as well as railway, and then certainly OTR, over the road trucking, as they're picking up their deliveries from one transport mechanism to the other, right?
Yeah. And just to add another flavor to that, there's a lot of direct to consumer now that has become really popular because of COVID. So you can throw the warehouses that are strategically placed, on whatever continent you're on, United States, Europe, Asia, whatever the case may be, and they become part of that supply chain as well. And so they have to be in the loop on all of that communication, all that messaging. So the systems have to respond to that as well.
That's right. So one of the things that I think we've done a pretty damn good job of is doing a single pane of glass. How do I take all these disparate systems and boil that information and data into a single view, single actionable view that allows us to save on time, save on the cost associated with that time, and make sure that we're taking out any loss of integrity from a data perspective and have that all integrated.
That's right.
And as we look through that single pane of glass, we're looking at what, Rob? We're looking at load boards, we're looking at bookings, we're looking at route optimization. What else are we looking at here?
Yeah, so track and trace. What's the actual position of my cargo? Depending on the type of business that you're in and where your supply chain is, that could be anywhere in the world. So, and then depending on the scale of business that you're in. You could be talking about, 5 loads at a time, 500 loads at a time. Who knows? So, yeah, that single pane of glass becomes a pretty comprehensive kind of cockpit, if you will, of information, because you need to be able to see things holistically across all those loads, and then be able to zoom in on, the booking of a specific load or the tracking of a specific load, and be able to come up and down in that view.
That's right. That's right. So once we're able to kind of bring all that visibility into one particular place, there's also an implication on what's happening to the data at the same time behind the scenes, right?
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about data aggregation and how that plays into this too from the next perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think most people in shipping and logistics are aware of TMSs, transportation management systems, ERP systems, and with the maturity of those packages that are pretty prevalent now, you need a way to grab that data from all those systems for those parties that are in your supply chain. And so how do you aggregate that? How do you do that if you're working with, 10 3PLs across the country, or 10 trucking companies? You need to be able to all aggregate all of that data so that you can have the one pane of glass, because that's the dependency. If you don't have the data, you don't have the one pane. And that's where the evolution of that EDI solution becomes really important, because you need to be able to collect that data, and then you need to be able to store it in one repository so you can create, those neat tools that show the one pane of glass.
That's right.
So that's probably where we need to start and kind of talk about some of those, that flow of that data.
Sure. As we look across the software ecosystem that supports this industry, these folks are operating out of a variety of different CSP, cloud service providers, as well. And so from a cloud agnostic perspective, having the ability to move seamlessly in and out of each one of those CSPs seems like it's going to be something that's not only of importance now, but going to be important for a very, very long time, right?
Yeah, it is very important. And we've talked about the transition away from EDI to APIs. We've talked about these new systems, which is great. But if you're jumping across all these systems and all these platforms, how do you know it's all secure? I mean, what do you do to ensure security?
The boogeyman is always waiting around the corner. The bad actors and the threats are more abundant now than ever. Not the least of which, but perhaps one of the larger attacks that's well known was against Maersk a couple years ago, and what happened to that company. And luckily that they were able to recover from that. But we're seeing a huge amount of activity going against the logistics industry right now. Even inclusive of that, there from a ransomware perspective, we're looking at including manufacturing, over 64% of the entire amount of ransomware attacks are being waged against logistics and manufacturing. And if you stop and you think about that in the entire grand scheme of things, that's a whole heck of a lot of concentration on a particular industry, right? That's huge. That's huge. And I think, if you put your black hat on for a second and think about why that is, it's because it's, again, even in North America, again, $1 trillion a year, that's a whole hell of a lot of money. And if you have the ability as a bad actor to come in there and disrupt activity and hold that for ransom, well, you're looking at a pretty healthy payday potentially if you're able to pull it off. And so, when we work from a cybersecurity perspective with a lot of our clients in this industry, we start with them and we say, when was the last time you've done a cybersecurity assessment? And a lot of the time the answer is, oh, it was, I think, a year ago, but we've changed systems since then. We haven't done a password role. We don't have multi-factor authentication enabled. And there's a variety of things that unfortunately are not addressed on their face. And I think that creates a lot of opportunities and exploits for the bad actors to take advantage of these companies just because they haven't done some basic blocking and tackling. The second step, in there is really identifying with them, what are their crown jewels? What are the systems? What is the data that if it were to get popped, puts you dead in water? And those conversations are really good conversations, because depending on who you ask, that you're going to receive a very different answer. And depending on the different answer, there's going to be a different way on how you can secure those things. And so, it's an important, perspective to have at the entire organizational level as you approach those opportunities from a cyber perspective. Understanding what the threat landscape looks like across the enterprise, across the vertical, common exploits that can be guarded against relatively easily because we've seen them before. Those are important discussions to have. And, I'll finalize kind of one other big ticket item, which is a risk-based approach to cybersecurity. We are in this era of pandemic where, unfortunately, the global economy has taken a pretty substantial hit. And with those substantial hits come, in some cases, a reduction in budget, and cybersecurity as a line item is no exception to budget crunches. And so your option is, hey, do the best you can do with what you have, and you draw a line in the sand after some set of features and protection that you have in place. Or what we approach a lot of our customers nowadays is this risk-based approach, which is that prioritization of different systems in sensitivity and priority order, and make sure that we're doing the best job possible to focus on those items and make them as secure as we can. And then, as we go outside of that, things that are, a little bit less important, maybe you think about, pulling back on throttle on some of those opportunities, but making sure that you're managing your budget commensurately with the amount of risk in a particular area of the business. That's a big one for us right now.
Yeah. That's great, Alex. Well, so let's shift topics here just real quick. You mentioned risks. Let's talk a little bit about the risks to be aware of as you try to modernize your systems to support logistics in a better way. You know what? I'll start
Sure.
in terms of just some business hurdles, right? From a business perspective, I think one thing that our clients are doing a good job of is understanding what the impact to the business is when you don't provide a good customer experience. It's real easy to get kind of wrapped around the cost of some of these modernization efforts for your technology platforms. But the bottom line is you're talking about revenue here, right? So
Right.
If you are a trucking company or a 3PL or a shipper, you're talking about your bread and butter here. And, in the consumer world, people have gotten really used to, using their mobile phones to do whatever they need to do, to jumping on a website and not having to worry about making phone calls, shooting emails, or waiting for anything. So I think the business hurdles are, understand what's happening with your customers, really dive into the needs and the problems that they're encountering so that you can make sure that the technology can address those, and who knows, you can get a bump in revenue and a bump in profitability as a result.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there's a distinct opportunity for our clients in this space to recognize a strong improvement from a return on investment in technology if it's done in a thoughtful end-to-end manner across, the risk areas that you were talking about, Rob, both business, process, and fundamentally the technical side of it, just having extreme fragmentation between these systems, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned processes. That's a really good one because I think a lot of our clients are finding that they've got pockets of automation. There's some good things that are happening, but inherently, you're missing a leg in that trip plan, or you don't have visibility for some key event, and now you've lost visibility for a day or 2 days or 2 weeks, and that's just not acceptable to a customer these days. So I think identifying, from shipment to payment, what are the holes that you're seeing in the life cycle of that shipment, and how do you address those to make that customer experience a valuable one?
Right. Definitely. Definitely.
What do you think from a technical? What are some of the technical risks that they need to keep in mind?
Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier in this discussion, and revisiting that is the fact that you have so many systems, so little time. And to your other comment regarding business hurdles and meeting customer expectations, this is a big deal, right? We live in an instant gratification, environment right now, right? We hit the button on our app and we want to see that package arrive here in the next hour, right? And I think certainly as a consumer that I can lose sight of the intricacies and technicalities that happen for that to even occur.
Yeah.
And I think as we approach that and we use that as an example, how difficult is it to make that transaction happen in that time frame? And the answer is it's extraordinarily difficult. And the people that are doing it best are the people who are taking the time to invest in automation and to invest in the consolidation of those systems so that they can operate them in a seamless and single pane of glass environment.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. For me, I think another technical hurdle is that a lot of times I think there's kind of this knee-jerk reaction that takes place of I need to integrate with a particular partner. So go have a developer just write some code to create an interface, but they don't think about the governance of that. They don't think about identity management. They don't think about access management. And I think what it comes down to is you need to really consider a more strategic view of the design of your microservice architecture, of how your APIs are going to be laid out. And if you do that, then you can leverage all the great technological tools that are available in the cloud these days. But if you don't have a really elegant design, you can end up creating a pretty big mess that creates a lot of technical debt in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then somebody else down the line gets to tackle that that hole and open that can of worms all over again, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or you've published a set of APIs that don't allow you to interface with all your partners. So now you've got to change them, and you've created all these problems that have to get communicated out to the partners you are connected to, and you've created a big mess. And that's where I think a company like Headstorm, we take a lot of pride in creating those elegant designs that don't create technical debt, or at least minimize it, so that you don't paint yourself in a corner in the long run.
That's right. That's right.
All right. So I guess last topic, where do we get started? Some of this stuff can maybe be a little overwhelming to think about, and there's confusion on where do you go. So what's the first step, Alex?
Know thyself. And in this situation, know thy problem. Being able to correctly and effectively articulate what exactly your problem statement is going to be a huge one. And I think it all starts there. It's a very fragmented industry. We see some of the huge players that are household names that we see drive by on trucks up and down our streets on a daily basis. And then there's a lot of these smaller ones, third-party logistics companies, who are also a key instrument in making sure that all of these things happen and packages get delivered and move between one company and the other one before they can ultimately reach their final destinations. And the problem, I think, looks and feels a little bit different for each and every one of the folks in the industry. But having a trusted partner as you approach this definition process of what exactly the problem is going to be paramount in making sure that you can move to the next phase, which is in fact outlining the constraints. And I think when you and I have talked about this in the past, some of the constraints we talk about are time, cost, and technical debt, which is one of the things that you alluded to just a second ago, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And really it comes down to identifying those constraints and then prioritizing, the business value that they comprise. So if it takes a certain amount of time, but you can generate, this much more revenue because you've closed a gap and you've made yourself more competitive, hey, you made the business case and it's worth it. So,
right.
Go after it. I think that you mentioned technical debt. I think that's a huge one, especially in this industry, because a lot of the companies have been around for a long time. You have some companies that have been in business for 100 years at this point. So you've got systems and technologies that are in varying levels of age and kind of declining capability, and so you gotta define where those gaps are, where the problems are, and then just prioritize those from a business perspective, and go attack them.
That's right. And one of the things that we always talk about here at Headstorm is impact engineering, right? And that impact engineering is something that is extraordinarily important. And for us, what that means is, on behalf of our clients and partners here, making sure that we're giving our clients and partners clear line of sight to the return on the investment. What does this mean from a time perspective? What does this mean from a dollar perspective? And ultimately, what am I recognizing as a return on this investment as I move forward to start addressing these problems, right?
Yeah, that's great. I think another place to start is just defining the solution. So what does success look like? And what can we achieve to make our customers and make our partners more happy, so that in the long run we get more loads, we get more shipments, and we've got more business to support.
Right.
I think from a technical perspective, those solutions, for us, we take a pretty holistic view here at Headstorm when we talk about technology solutions, because not only are we talking about just meeting, certain requirements, but we also want to bring, the velocity of DevOps to the table. We want to bring agile methods and ceremonies so that we can be nimble and change to whatever the needs of our client are. And then the cloud. The cloud has brought so much agility and velocity to the table that we can spin up solutions in a very rapid manner and get new functionality out the door more quickly than ever before. And so taking some of those behaviors, some of those ways of working, and kind of adding those as additional goals to just the table stakes of building a new feature or a new function,
Sure.
I think is really, really important.
Sure. Yeah, when we talk about, defining that solution, I'll use the term again because this is near and dear to our hearts here at Headstorm, which is impact engineering, right? You talked about Agile, you talked about ceremonies depending on which flavor of Agile that we're practicing, but fundamentally what we try to do is define the large scale solution and then break that down into bite-sized pieces that we can deliver value on as quickly as possible. Some people call that the WISP shift model, the weighted shortest job first. And other folks refer to it just as the ruthless and relentless prioritization of initiatives inside of that, what that solution context looks like. And I think that's an important thing, as we approach these with our partners and clients, is making sure that they understand, how do I get the most value as quickly as possible? Let's not lose sight of what the end vision is in the end solution, but how does that ladder up to an end solution in recognizing as much value in the short term?
Well said, Alex.
Sure.
Okay. I think that's it.
Pleasure talking to you as always, Rob. And
Great to see you, my friend.
looking forward to the next round.
Yeah, looking forward to us being in the office at the same time one of these
There
days.
you go.